Happy Devils Thursday. I almost said Wednesday. Thursday on a one-day delay. It's the State of the Fan Address presented by pucksandpitchforks.com. I'm your host, Sam Wu, here with Nick Villano, editor-in-chief, streaming live on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, X Live, and Twitch on the Let's Go Devils Network. Did I say X Live? Yeah, I said X Live. You like Twitter Live. Which is it, Nick?
It's Twitter. It'll always be Twitter to me.
Oh, my goodness. Ah.
I missed the Bluebird.
Sorry, Nick. I'm just looking. I already see an error on the title page. Instagram hockey. It's a lowercase I, and my OCD is telling me to fix that on our lower third.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you fixed that, and let's talk about some Instagram hockey. I mean, listen, I don't want to get into jump right into Valaket's comments because it's just been talked to death. I do want to talk about the sweet revenge that is the fact that the Devils, the Rangers have been reeling this whole season. It seems like they got off to a really fast start. It seemed to mask some of the real issues, but there's a lot of just weird talk around that team. Our friend of the podcast, Stan Fisher, has a lot of mean things to say, but it just, even as the Rangers were playing their best hockey, it seemed like all the talk was about the contentious nature of the Igor Shesterkin negotiations, and then just the talk around Alex Lafreniere's contract and whether that was too much money to go right off the bat. But I look at where I hate when we have to wait so long for a Devils-Rangers matchup. And we finally got it on Monday. It's December. And, it's the 1 year since Dougie Hamilton's injury. So it's kind of an interesting pinpoint of kind of where the season really fell off the rails last year. And now the Devils are the reason the Rangers fell off the rails themselves. And it's funny because both teams, both the Rangers and the Devils, they had a big break, right? The Devils don't play till tomorrow. Rangers don't play till Saturday. And, so a lot of people thought that something was going to happen in New York. It just never did, right? Villaviette's still the coach, as he should be. They haven't made a panic trade, as they shouldn't. It's just funny that it was the Devils, and it was this dominant 5-1 victory, and it was just how the victory happened, right? Like, Jacob Markstrom looked incredibly solid in net. Jack Hughes, once again, just takes the Rangers to the woodshed, and it was goals across the board. It was the stars being stars. It was this new philosophy that the Devils have put together, and it's really, this was the first game where I looked at it and I said, man, Tom Fitzgerald did a really good job of building a team for Sheldon Keefe. And it was everything that Keefe loves about his teams. Like, it's really good defensemen, but defensemen who could do multiple things. I think the problem in Toronto is they kept giving him one-trick ponies. Besides Morgan Riley, obviously, but Morgan Riley is a really good talent. But the rest of it's just guys who do one thing really good and make them fit into a lineup. And this defensive unit, it's just seeing what Luke Hughes has turned into, right? He was an offensive dynamo, and now he's not scoring at all, and he's arguably even more impactful than he was last year. And I wrote an article not too long ago just alluding to Dougie Hamilton and the Four Nations, and I'm sure we'll kind of jump into those rosters and who's on it and who's not. But I talked about that first month of the season. Dougie Hamilton was terrible. Truly, he was bad. Really, really bad. As far as star defensemen in this league go, he's one of the worst in the league. Since then, been really good. like really good. Like scoring points, of course. Like he's I think he's last I checked, he's leading the Devils in defensemen in points, and he's I want to say eighth in the league among defensemen in points. Um, Double check me on that. Somebody in the Twitter comments, but I think he's eighth among defensemen in points. And on top of that, Sam, I think he led the league in giveaways in October, or he was really high. So if you take the aggregate and you look at Dougie Hamilton's numbers now, according to Natural Stat Trick, he's third in giveaways among defensemen. That looks terrible. But when you look at since November 1st, he's 26th, which is a little too high, but he holds onto the puck a lot. But so much better than third. There's just such a big difference there. So, I was a big proponent of separating Brendan Dillon and Dougie Hamilton, but Sheldon Keefe just kind of listened to his gut and let those waters tamper. And the problem there, and some people have pointed it out to me, is that to break up Brendan Dillon and Dougie Hamilton, you got to break up Jonas Siegenthaler and Jonathan Kovacevic, and you got to break up Brett Pesce and Luke Hughes, or you got to break up all three. And Brett Pesce and Luke Hughes are playing phenomenal hockey, and Jonathan Kovacevic and Jonas Siegenthaler might be the best defensive defenseman unit in the league. So I understand where a lot of people are coming from, and it worked out. Dougie Hamilton found his game. He needed a month to kind of get used to life after the or maybe he just had to kind of get back up to game speed and played in 10 months. And Dylan, he got used to the system. He's making fewer mistakes. And, I've noticed he's not even hitting big as much. I think that's just because he's trying to avoid those mistakes and avoid the giveaways and avoid the plays that put him out of position. But he's still playing physical hockey. And then you see the forwards playing that physical hockey as well. You see a lot of people talk about Jack Hughes' defense, which is an interesting development that people are talking about his defense. Not even Nico Hischier's defense. We're talking about Jack Hughes' defense. This is a guy who's he's already played more minutes on the penalty kill this year than he did last year, all of last year. So it's the developments that are happening. The Devils have Sheldon Keefe written all over it, and everything was on full display in that Rangers game, and it showed how, Peter Laviolette just got out-coached.
Well, out-coached and outclassed. I mean, the Rangers are in, again, I don't want to make it about the Rangers, but the Rangers are at a crossroads of where they're going because their window opened. I mean, they forced the window to open up to win the Stanley Cup. Remember how they sent that letter to season ticket holders? Okay, we're going to rip it down, rebuild, and they were doing just fine. And then the Tom Wilson incident that basically destroyed that whole idea and concept, and then they went for it, hired Chris Drury and they just went for it, and that window is closing now. Whereas the Devils, they stayed the course, they stayed the path. Yes, there were growing pains, lots of growing pains, but now you see the future is now. You see the difference between the two franchises. Remember, in 2019, it was the Devils' number 1 pick, Rangers' number 2, right? 2020, the Rangers had the first overall pick. The Devils had 3 picks in that first round. It was Alexander Holtz, it was Dawson Mercer, and it was Shakir Mohammadulin, which is really now Paul Cotter and Timo Meyer. In that case with the trades. So You look at that, but the Rangers were win now, because the owner got pissed off because he wasn't liking the rebuild and didn't like the Rangers getting pushed around because of Tom Wilson that was just dominating physically. And we all laughed at it. But they had a nice run there. But last season, I believe, was really their last real chance, or at least the odds of getting to the Stanley Cup and winning it. And Laviolette, second year, third year, he will fall off a little bit. And I didn't think it would
Yeah,
happen
we talked
this.
about that. Yeah.
I didn't think it would happen this fast. But things can change in a heartbeat because if you remember the Florida Panthers a couple years ago, they barely made it to the playoffs, and we were thinking, okay, Boston's just going to run over them, and then suddenly they became a contender and was in the Stanley Cup Finals, eventually losing to Vegas, I believe.
Yeah, but that team was really good, right? That was the first year of Matthew Tkachuk. They had some injury bad luck. That was a really good team to just make it into the playoffs. And again, we forget they make it to the playoffs because the Penguins blew it, right? Like the Penguins had the insider's edge to make it, and they lost to the Blackhawks. I think it was like a pre-Bedard Blackhawks, like a really bad
Yeah.
Blackhawks team. So you know, I don't want to underestimate this Rangers team because they still got Shesterkin. They still got Panarin, who's playing at the height of his powers. Like Panarin's really good, and I did want to point out the real reason why that rebuild nonsense ended is because Panarin said that the Rangers are bust, and I had heard people saying that the Devils tried to get Panarin, which again it would have been another example of I think that was Ray Shero at the time, right? That was like 2019
I believe so.
when
Yep. Yep.
I heard that Ray Shero made a run, but he never really had a chance. And the prevailing wisdom was that the Islanders were that other team that ended up just driving up the price on Panarin. But you'll pay Panarin $11.5 million. You don't care about that when he's playing at an MVP level every year. But that was what kind of like changed their mindset. And now you have to look at it if you're the Rangers. If this really is the end, like how do you look at this era? Was this a success? I mean, you made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. I believe they made the Eastern Conference Finals the year before the Devils knocked them out too, right? 2022.
Mm-hmm.
So you made it to Eastern Conference Finals. I also think like this is a Rangers team that's incredibly lucky. I just think that the Metro was in this weird place, and it's still there. You look at it right now, and on paper, it looks like the Metro's the best division in hockey, and I don't believe what I'm seeing. I think Devils are good. I've been on the record that I thought Washington was going to be a good team. I was one of the few who was really banging the drum. I think Washington, I really like the moves they made this offseason. Upgrading the goalie was really big for them. I thought Pierre-Luc Dubois was an interesting risk to take. I thought Alex Ovechkin, I wasn't really sure, but I thought that it was 50-50 that he was going to come back and be the same, not a 50-goal scorer like he was on pace to be, but I thought he could be like a 35-goal scorer again. But Carolina still has major goaltending issues. I don't know how they haven't addressed this yet. Like, the Devils just knew they have goaltending issues, and they were like, we can't keep doing this. And they went and got Markstrom and Allen last year. The Hurricanes came in with Freddie Anderson again this year. Freddie Anderson, goalie, can't stay on the ice, and he's hurt again. And then you got a Devils team who's as riding high as we are. It's a flawed team in so much that I mean the shutouts like it's still something that I think about. Like, why did this team get shut out so often in November when it was playing its best hockey? That's something that you have to kind of figure out. And maybe it's just nights that maybe it's just maybe that's part of the Sheldon Keefe experience, right? It's just trying to figure out where everything fits. But the Metropolitan, I don't think is as dominant as it looks like it is in the standings right now. And I think that's part of why the Rangers are making these moves is because like we're doing this against this division. Like Columbus is fine, right? They're really living off the emotions. I just don't see the talent. Like obviously, Werenski is one of the best defensemen, but besides that, it's just there's just a lack of talent, especially at forward. And in goal, to be honest. Philadelphia fell off again. It was going to take Mitchkoff to really jump into the NHL and be a superstar, and he just hasn't. He's been good,
Well,
but he hasn't been a
Philadelphia's been
superstar.
hot. Philadelphia's been hot as of late, winning 4 straight.
Yeah, for sure. Again, this is a team with talent, and I think they're winning tonight too, right? I think they're up 3-2. So, they can make that five, which would tie the winning streak of Utica, where Utica was on fire. I know they lost, I think it was last night, and Nico Dawes is currently injured, but Utica making a comeback and they're not in it, but 5 wins in a row is very impressive for Utica. We can talk about that in a minute, but and then you have uh, Pittsburgh, who's just been a disaster. It's been a tire fire in the Steel City, and I don't really know what's going to happen there. It sounds like they're going to sell. They sold on Jake Gensel. Was that last year, right? They sold Jake Gensel last year. Um, they're going to sell pieces. I don't think they're going to sell Crosby, but they could sell Malkin, could sell Letang. They're going to try their best to sell and they have a bunch of like other pieces like around the peripherals. So when you look at it, I guess this is all to say like the Devils have a real opportunity this year. I really just didn't think they did. Like coming in, I was like, make the playoffs, win a round, and I'll be happy. This isn't the year for you to contend. I just didn't think it was. I know you got Markstrom. I know you fixed the things. I know you got like a lot of really interesting pieces. But with Sheldon keeping his first year, I don't want to put a lot of expectations on it, and I still don't. Um, but I did just want to point out that like the Eastern Conference Final is pretty. It's right there. You really went toe to toe with Washington when they were at their very best, and you were not. Right, the Devils were not at their very best until very recently, and they've beaten Washington probably more than anybody else. And you don't play Washington again all year, which is weird. Like the schedule makers just did a really weird thing with the Devils schedule this year. But so you're done with Washington. You look good against Carolina. And you look like you go toe to toe with them. And if they can't get the goalie thing figured out, I think the Devils win that series. And then you got the Rangers, who are just I don't. Everything you hear about them is sell. And like I get the Jacob Trouba thing. Like, of course they're gonna want to trade Trouba. You know what I mean? They've been trying to trade Trouba for a year. Um, but all the reports said they put Kreider out there, so it got leaked, so it sent a message to the locker room, and the locker room hasn't responded. Like they still look like dogs out there. They look like they're just not putting their full effort in. So like if you're the Devils and you're looking at this, like you have to make that top three. You can't fall to the wild card. You can't have to go through that Atlantic Division gauntlet. You have to make the top three if you're the Devils. And I think by points percentage they are ahead of the Rangers there. Excuse me, but the Devils are in a playoff spot in American Thanksgiving, which is like a huge. That's like the milestone that everybody talks about. Like most of the teams that are in the playoff spots now are going to stay in a playoff spot. You got to make the top three. Play the Metro Division opponents. I think it's there for the taking. Like I truly do. I truly think this Devils team can get to the Eastern Conference Final, and then you kind of have to like see who your opponent is. You don't want it to be Tampa because Tampa has your number. But I always like look at it like that. Remember that 2018 Devils team, and I wrote about this. The Devils went 3-0 against the Lightning that year in the regular season, and then just got dollywalked in the playoffs. It was just sometimes regular season doesn't matter, but I don't want to see the Lightning if you're in the Eastern Conference Finals. I kind of want to see Toronto just because it would be content gold for pucks and pitchforks. Like it would be fantastic to get the Maple Leafs fans all riled up about this. Sheldon Keefe has a chance to do the funniest thing by taking out his former team. I'm not sleeping on Boston with a new coach. They look really good with a new coach. And then there's obviously Florida. Obviously, the Devils beat Florida 2 games in a row, but beating them in November has no bearing on what happens in April. So, um, again, it's the Devils have this incredible opportunity. And I think that they have some things to do. Like I said, it's a flawed team still. I still think you have to make a trade for a top nine guy, especially if Lazar is out for through March. If that's what we're looking at. And Bastion, I know he's been skating, but I would think he'd be a guy that would go the other way at this point. And Tatar looks like he's back, and thankfully he's going on the third line. I'm really happy for him because he deserves it. Um, that was a lot, Sam. I understand. Let me ask you this: what do you think of this Devils team when you look at the totality? Like, what are your expectations from this team?
So far, they've exceeded my expectations because I was one of the few that was not buying it about the moves this past
Mm-hmm.
offseason, but I'm still a little leery only because injuries do happen. But it seems like Pesci is the real deal. It seems like Dylan's the real deal. Cotter's the real deal. Sheldon Keefe is the real deal. What giving the veteran leadership and support to some of the young players like Luke Hughes has done wonders for Luke, where we get to see his
Mm-hmm.
exceptional skill and strength on display, where he doesn't have to knock down players. He just has to basically shadow them, and that's just good enough. And Chico and I talked about Scott Niedermayer. That's how Scott Niedermayer played for so many years in the NHL, using that speed and skill. He didn't have to knock players down. He just had to keep up with them. And then keeping up with them, he was able to, again, play great defense, but on transition, he can use his afterburners when needed. It was a different era, but they're very similar. If you watch Luke closely, how he is defending the net right now, very very similar to like Scott Niedermayer. Um, but to really answer your question, what I want to see the Devils is continue what they're doing well. They play for each other. Whenever a player gets hit, there's always a response back. When there's a cheap shot, there's a response back. It's not, it used to be, Nick, before this year, it used to be, oh, we got McDermott. He can respond. No, they're responding like a team right now. And that's the biggest difference. They're playing for each other. And you could see that it's a lot of these players are oozing with confidence right now. Oozing with confidence and no hesitation of mixing it up at all costs. And they're protecting the goaltender as well.
Okay, I just want to. Uh, I'm really good at patting myself in the back, and I'm going to do it here because so many people were like, "It's like, oh, you should go after Trouba. Like he's the guy that's going to respond, or you should go after Ryan Reeves, or you should." I was like, no, you got to get guys who play in the system who can respond. And I pointed out Timo Meyer. That's a guy that will respond. He's a star player, but he'll respond. He'll hit a guy. He'll get in somebody's face. He'll do whatever he has to do. And this offseason, Tom Fitzgerald prioritized that. You got Paul Cotter, who's a guy who's played with, before the season, he played with Mark Stone. He played with William Karlsson. He's a guy who can play up in the lineup, but at the same time, hard nosed, get in your face, hit you, it doesn't care. Stefan Nason, another guy who, before the season, he wasn't really playing up in the lineup at all in Carolina, but hard nosed and had some really good offensive stats last year. And looks like he's, some guys just figure it out really late. And these late draft guys, these undrafted guys, these guys who didn't have a lot of expectations behind them. Some of them were Jesper Bratt, where right away you're like, oh, we missed on this. Teams missed on this guy. And now he's one of the best players in the league. And other guys, it just takes a long time. And the Devils brought him back, and he's looking like the best signing of the offseason in the entire league. The Devils might have the best offseason signing and the offseason trade between him and Kovacevic, right? Like, they're not going to get the flash of I'm trying to think of the big offseason signings. I can't even think of them anymore. The big offseason trades, but they're not going to get the flash, the pomp and circumstance of a Oliver Ekman-Larsson, or we talked about the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, or Patrick Laine, or those types, but they might be more effective, because Kovacevic just come in and just done his job as well as anybody in the league. And I talked about this. You're almost in a bad position with Kovacevic because what do? Can you re-sign him? You got Simone Nemeth and Seamus Casey in the AHL, and they both have at times in their career have shown that they're NHL ready. They're both not NHL ready at this very moment. They definitely deserve to be in the AHL, but at times have shown an ability to play in the NHL at an NHL level, and probably would be in the NHL on 15 teams in this league. So that I wrote about this. I mean, can you re-sign Jonathan Kovacevic? I know it's a huge pivot. I just took us on a completely different journey, but I do want your thoughts on it because it feels like a no-brainer from a production standpoint, but it's not a no-brainer from just an asset allocation.
What's his cap hit right now?
It is the lowest it possibly could be. It's $775,000.
Well, for the right price, I would re-sign him, but realize, there is a salary cap. Eventually, you're going to have to pay Luke Hughes, and eventually, you're going to have to pay a lot of these players. You're going to have to find.
That eventually is next year for Luke Hughes.
Yeah, and if you can't re-sign them, you better find somebody else at that price, because sometimes in the salary cap era, when you have a budget, these are the budget players that you need to get.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that guys like Kovacevic is a dime a dozen, but you're going to have this is where the scouting, this is where all the research, the analytics, all that stuff that Tom Fitzgerald, all the tools he has. It's kind of like Moneyball, in baseball. Yeah. So
his pro scouts deserve a raise because they did yeoman's work this offseason.
Oh, absolutely. But I think, again, there are other players like that in that price range. It's just you have to find them. And some players,
you could just call the AHL because both Seamus Casey and Simone Nemeth are in that price range, so you're fine.
But here's the thing: what's his Kovacevic's role is to buy time for these guys to develop too. That was kind of his role to add the depth, a veteran depth, on that defense. Yeah. Because injuries do happen, so you don't have to send these guys like Nemeth last year, who had no business being in the NHL. He should have been developing in the AHL, and you kind of robbed him of that. Same with Nico Dawes. When he came up, it's all emergency basis. And I don't think it's fair to those players.
At least Nemeth looked all right. He looked pretty good.
Oh, I'm not going to criticize him there, although I still think that the Devils should have drafted Logan Cooley. But, again, D guys take time to develop. You can't rob them their time
Hmm.
for development. There's certain players that maybe but again, I'm not expecting Nemitz to be a Kel McCarr, but you gotta he's got to do better. In Utica.
Yeah, you're right because he hasn't played well, and the mistakes that hurt him in the NHL are still happening. He just wasn't making good decisions. He pinched at the wrong time all the time. And it sounds like, Christy Flannery, who's been on this podcast as well from the Hockey News, reported that he's still making those mistakes. And I'm of the thought that
What? He's the
it's
next Ty
interesting
Smith.
since no, I don't think he's the next Ty Smith. I'm of the thought right now that I think it's on the top of everyone's mind just because David Jirashek from the Columbus just got traded, and he was like the other defenseman in that draft. Like, is it going to be Jirashek? Is it going to be Nemitz? The difference between Jirashek and Nemitz is Jirashek can't skate, and like that was always his mo. And Columbus drafted him, and he's got offensive firepower, but he can't skate, and like that's hard. That's hard to like equate those two. And it takes like the perfect development and the right coaching. So, and honestly, I think Jirashek is in the perfect place. I think Minnesota has really good. I think John Hines is getting love right now just because Minnesota's playing so well. I I have been on record that I didn't think John Hines did a good job here. I don't. Um, but people are going back and giving me his flowers, and that's fine. I, I mean, the one thing he did is he trusted who was good, no matter what. When Taylor Hall was ready to steal the show, he gave him the keys to steal the show. And Keith Kincaid wasn't the big money player, but Corey Schneider was. But he said, "Go with Keith Kincaid." And when Keith Kincaid brought you to the show, and then clearly was just ran out of steam in the playoffs, it took cojones to go to Corey Schneider, who had been terrible all season. And Corey Schneider, if you like, that's one thing about that series that, and again, like it was a 5-game series loss, which it really should have been 6. The referee stole one of the games from the Devils, but it is what it is. The Corey Schneider, like the underrated part of that is Corey Schneider came in and was great in that series, like full on great. And John Hines made that decision to go to him. Like it took certain level of impetus, or I think that's not the right word, but a certain level of guts to make that decision. I don't hate John Hines like some people do. I just I think he like the worst parts about Lindy Ruff were even worse under Hines, like the line blenders and the how many times did he put Jesper Bratt in the doghouse and he benched him and he healthy scratched him and like all these other things when he was clearly one of the most talented forwards on the team. But again, I'm also not above thinking that John Hines has learned from these from these stints, between here and Nashville. And, maybe Minnesota is just where, he's grown to the point where he's figured it out. Because it does seem like he still has that ability to give the keys. Somebody who's done that with Kirill Kaprizov. But, whatever. I think I'm going to go on a rant, but I want to just if people want to give John Hines his flowers for what he did with the Devils, sure. But to sit here and pretend like he's the reason Jesper Bratt is what he is today, I just don't believe it. I think he misused Jack Hughes in that final year. I think he made desperation moves that didn't make any sense. And, this is a weird way to end the podcast, Sam, but I somehow we got into a conversation on John Hines because of David Jirashek. Let me make us full circle. Let's bring it back to Nemitz. I'm not worried about Nemitz. I think it's the shoulder injury that like just threw everything off that that he suffered in Olympic qualifiers. I think we don't talk about that enough. And I think he's overcompensating, which is causing the problem with decision making. But like, I also don't know why coaches haven't sat him down and be like, "What were you thinking here?" And like, don't clap in his face, but what were you thinking here to make you pinch? Like the puck's not even there. Like there's just like these asinine decisions that he's making, and really like getting him to understand like when to pinch and when to not, because that's really it. Even when he was in the NHL, he was fine in his own zone. He was fine on the power play when he played at Southernly, fine on the penalty kill. It was when he was in the offensive zone and he would pinch and he would leave Seamus Casey at a 2-on-1 so many times. And this is a rookie trying to like deal with that. It just didn't work. So hopefully they can figure that out. But again, that's kind of small in the grand scheme of things. His skating's not bad. His shooting's not bad. His passing's not bad. It's just he's got to get better on the decision making.
Yeah, well, we shall see. I mean, give him another year of AHL development, and I'll judge him next training camp, and if he makes the team next season.
I think he really has to. I would hope he makes the team next year.
You would think,
but we'll see.
Who knows? He could be the next Ty Smith.
You keep saying that. What do you? I don't. If anything, I think he'd be the next Will Butcher. Which Ty Smith. I mean, I don't know. Both of those situations need to be studied. How Ty Smith went from the best rookie defenseman one year to forgetting how to play hockey, and how Will Butcher went from like a solid, really good defenseman to, well, see, and this is back to John Hines. John Hines ruined Will Butcher because he said, go be a defensive defenseman. He was giving him a ton of defensive zone faceoffs. Like, no, let the guy do what he does best and play him where he needs to. Like, it was just, you did trial by fire, and you were doing things that you should do in training camp and test things out in preseason in the regular season for long stretches, for like 10, 15, 20 games. I will never sit here and say that John Hines was a good coach with the Devils. He might be a good coach now. Was not a good coach with the Devils.
Yeah, I never knew what the love affair was with John Hines. I mean, again, he knows how to get head coaching jobs, but finally, maybe this is the one.
Players like him.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
He kind of reminds me a little bit.
How far did he go with Nashville? Didn't he go pretty far with Nashville one year?
I think 2 rounds.
Good enough. But on that note, I'm ready for plugs.
All right, go right ahead, Nick.
Yeah. We have a ton of articles on pucksandpitchforks.com.
Good word to use.
Neil Villano just wrote about Luke Hughes and how he's redefined his game to become a really good defensive defenseman, and why that's making him possibly the top defenseman on the Devils right now. Jack Schiller talked about physicality and how that's been the Devils' insurance policy when all fails. Jennifer Streeter talked about the Hughes brothers' embarrassing Rangers effort, embarrassing in the best possible way. Craig Patrick has been doing this fun series about he kind of looks at like the stat page and finds one stat for each player and tells the story about why they're successful based on that one stat. He just did the defenseman article that came out yesterday. So go take a look at that one. I really like this series. He did one on the forwards last week. So check that one out as well. I talked about Dougie Hamilton missing the Four Nations roster. We didn't talk about Four Nations at all. I think it's a blessing in disguise that Dougie Hamilton didn't make the roster. There's a multitude of reasons. Mm-hmm. There's a multitude of stats of why he should have made the roster, but I think it's a good thing for the Devils. Vinny Parisi talked about Four Nations as well and the players and why they deserve to be on it. Jersey Joe talked about the New Jersey Devils holiday wish list. Luke Garrison talked about that game against the Rangers. We have articles on Taylor Hall and a rumor with him. We have I talked about Nils Hoglander, who was loosely tied to the Devils, but he might be available. We talked about Thomas Tatar and his injury. We talked about listen. Go to pucksandpitchforks.com. We have stories on stories and stories on stories. I also talked about Jacob Markstrom, and I talked about Kovacevic. Go read that Kovacevic article. I make a compelling case about the pros and cons about resigning him now after a really good start.
Wow. Pucksandpitchforks.com.
Oh, and one last one.
Yep.
Did you know that Jack Hughes has skated the equivalent of from Prudential Center to Philadelphia this season?
Wow. There's actually
one of the top. There's a miles skated statistic, and Jack Hughes has skated to Philadelphia this season.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I wrote about that stat just because I thought it was interesting and just kind of where it all came from and just kind of like, but it's always interesting to see those miles skated stats. I think he's still the leader in miles skated, but I need to double check that.
Well, you do that, and we will be back next Wednesday for the State of the Fan address. Hopefully we don't have any tech issues. And Devils will play Seattle on Friday, Colorado on Sunday. It's actually a 5-game homestand. Toronto, I believe, on that next Tuesday. LA, and then Chicago. I actually memorized that.
Wow. Yeah. So a lot of Western Conference teams.
Yep. And sign up to joinourcrew.com. Now, this Friday and Sunday, we won't be at American Whiskey, unfortunately, because I'll be at the Big Ten Championship game in Indianapolis on Saturday. So, a little scheduling conflict. Doing one of those bucket list items, Nick. So I'll be driving a lot.
Ticking off a bunch of them this year.
Yeah, Mets game, opening night, Giants game, all sorts of stuff.
Well, hopefully the Giants aren't on your bucket list.
Well, taking my nephew. That was on my bucket list.
All right.
Yeah.
It's a slot bucket list.
Even though his Eagles kicked the Giants' butt in. Anyway, another story for another day. Till next time, let's go Devils.